Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section below on my Critical Q&A videos, or have sent to me by email at askchrisShelton@gmail.com. In addition to answering any questions about Scientology, of course, or anything about me, I am branching out now, you might have noticed if you're a subscriber of my channel, to looking into other destructive cults and harmful groups out there, high control groups. And the recent interview I did with Christiana Miner regarding the Quiverful and Bill Gothard cult, for example, has been getting a lot of views and has been pretty informative for a lot of people, and I intend to continue with that. And you'll see this week the first part of an interview I'm doing with another person, cult related, that is not directly on the line of just Scientology, but is very much in alignment with and in tune with Scientology, and my sort of mission to expose that group. But they're not the only cults on the block, and I want to continue to expose the whole facade of that and what's out there on that particular line. So if you have any other questions for me in regards to destructive cults in general, I'll be happy to answer or take those up as well within my knowledge of that or what I can find out. So with that, let's get started on this week's show with your questions. Chris C. Hi Chris, I was looking forward to your response to the question about going exterior and was left wanting more because you didn't expand on the concept, i.e. what's involved physiologically and what function does it serve as far as keeping someone indoctrinated. Maybe sometime you can talk about that more. Jonathan Mark. I'm interested in the question of exteriorization as well, since Jason Begay in Going Clear mentioned it as his biggest win in Scientology. All right, well, let's talk about this a little bit more then, because I did kind of give it a pretty, I think a flash answer sort of response in the last time I talked about this. Exteriorization is something that is described as, within Scientology, was described as an out-of-body experience where a person as a spiritual being becomes aware to some degree or another that they are not in their body. And that doesn't necessarily mean or translate to being able to see things or see themselves outside their body. Hubbard was very generalized about this. He wanted basically any idea at all that a person had that they were outside of themselves, outside of their body, to be called going exterior, to be called exteriorization. And he came up with all kinds of techniques and commands that he would use to get a person to step out of their body, to view things outside their body, or hear, or in some way perceive that they were not in their head. He said the usual place for a spiritual being to be located was in the head, and to kind of view things through the eyes of the body and that sort of thing. And the whole point with exteriorization is that in terms of indoctrination, what it does is when somebody is convinced that they've had an out-of-body experience, they're sold on the fact that they are now a spiritual being and that they are not just a body, that this is not just all there is to life, that they are something different than that. They're guided into expecting this to happen by Hubbard and by his teachings. So it's, there's confirmation bias occurring here. There's an indoctrination that occurs which gives a person a preconceived idea of what's going to happen when they exteriorize. And Hubbard took pains in his lectures to not let people poo-poo or invalidate or get on somebody who claimed they had gone exterior, even if they were seeing things in a weird way, or shapes were vague or shadowy or things like that. He came up with different explanations to say why it would be that a person would be able to go exterior and yet still wouldn't be able to see things as clearly as 20/20 vision and things like that. He also described the idea that a person, a thetan who had, a thetan being the Scientology term for a spiritual being, a thetan who, when exterior, would be able to see in 360 degrees, ideally. So you would have perception all around, you know, and of course some people would pop out of their heads, but that wouldn't be what they would see. They'd hang out in the corner of a room and look down and that sort of thing. Now, Scientology is not the only subject or area where people have claimed out-of-body experiences. So you know, the indoctrination that occurs in Scientology is not unique to Scientology. There's other, you know, people talk about going out in their astral bodies, and people have had surgeries and operations and gone through tunnels of light and all that. That would be considered exteriorization, but Scientology doesn't require that you go see a light or go through, you know, tunnels or things like that. And in fact, in the Scientology world, if you're going through a tunnel and seeing a light, that's a bad thing, because that means you're going to an implant station and you want to pull the hell back from that and not, you know, stay away from the light and that sort of thing. There's the implant stations, meaning that there's places that you go between lives when your body dies and you're going to go get another body. As a thetan, you go to this location where they implant you. They put pictures and thoughts into your head, you know, so that you think certain ways and are forced to forget what happened in your last lifetime, and you have to go get another body and you start all over again, you know, sort of thing. So there's a lot to talk about with implants, so I'm not even going there right now. I'm just trying to give it a little brush off there, but that's kind of what is expected or what happens when people go exterior. And it really is super, super important to the indoctrination of Scientology, because the most fundamental idea in Scientology, if you were going to bring the entire faith back down to one concept, that concept is that you are an immortal spiritual being. And so the whole process of popping out of your body proves that to you. It's the ultimate proof, because it's completely 100% subjective. No one can measure it, no one can sense or experience it except you. And so it's totally personal to you. And it becomes, therefore, a bit of a belief rather than a, you know, objective fact, because it's unfalsifiable. I can't tell you, well, you didn't go out of your body. How do I say that? How do I prove that? You know, there's no way to. So it's kind of a faith-based sort of thing. People can imagine anything they want. I'm not really sure personally what to say about exteriorization, because I do have spiritual beliefs or hopes, as I've said before. And so I sort of hope that we do have some kind of spiritual existence. So I would be kind of biased in sort of thinking maybe that could happen, you know. But I have to say, you know, at least as a critical thinker, I have to put that there and say, I would like to see some proof of some kind, you know. And Hubbard offered up ideas of how there could be proof. You know, thetans were supposed to be able to move things. There's telekinesis and telepathy and other supernatural phenomenon, you know, ESP type phenomena that's supposed to accompany a person's, you know, abilities as they move up the Scientology ladder. And none of those things ever manifested in me or other people that I ever saw. So there's no proof there for me that Scientology is the way to go about accomplishing spiritual awareness. But I still hope that maybe, you know, there might be some way of doing that. But regardless of that, that's kind of what exteriorization is all about in Scientology. It was very heavily concentrated on in the early 1950s, from 1951, 2 till the mid-50s, 55, 56, when Hubbard said, okay, this isn't really working out, and we're going to kind of go off onto a different tack when dealing with people and doing auditing and stuff like that. And I think the reason for that, and looking back on it, is because I don't think he could convince enough people that they'd gone out of their body. You know, subjectively, I don't think he could convince them of that. He used commands like, be 3 feet back of your head. You know, you sit somebody down and you just tell them to do that. And he said that there were a certain percentage of people who could just do it. Well, that tells me there's a certain percentage of people who can imagine doing that. There was another one that he used that somebody else had come up with, which was try not to be 3 feet back of your head. And, you know, of course that sort of reverse psychology, pops a person out. And there were other commands, you know, that he would come up with, like, okay, imagine like sticky webs. Imagine sticky webs of theta, of spirit, coming out of you and attaching to the wall, and pull yourself out of your body. You know, like that was another way to get somebody out of their body. And he came up with tons and tons of ways of doing this. And then he would run commands on a person who said that they were exteriorized, and get them to go places, you know, go check out the surface of the moon, go look at the sun, go, you know, they called this the grand tour, and you'd go to Rome and go here and go there and all that sort of thing. And this was supposed to prove to people that they were having, you know, exterior moments. But like I said, if anybody ever challenged him on it, he was quick to come up with reasons why if somebody, you know, couldn't see what was going on accurately in the room next door, he'd come up with some explanation as to why their theta perceptics were not up to the challenge of doing that, you know, that kind of thing. So it's all just sort of a big circular logic sort of thing that goes round and round. And that, my friend, is about as much as I can talk about with exteriorization in Scientology right now. The Doctor. I noticed in Q&A 8, you mentioned you read a lot of science fiction and other books. You liked the Marvel Cinema stuff, but not comic books. Has it been asked what you thought of Battlefield Earth or LRH as a writer? How did you find time to read books? I didn't really like LRH as a writer the whole time that I was in Scientology, in terms of at least his pulp fiction. I hated his pulp fiction. I tried over and over again to try to read some of his westerns or adventure books or mysteries and whatnot, and I just thought they were horribly written. The dialogue was distractingly bad. The characterizations were cardboard cutout type stereotypes, and I just couldn't really get into it. So, and I wasn't even particularly shy about that opinion. I just told people, this just ain't for me. You know, some people in Scientology will just get this just crazy, you know, sort of look in their eyes about, this passionate daze about what a great writer Hubbard is, and, oh, he's so good, I just love all of his pulps. And I just could not go there. I did enjoy Battlefield Earth, and I read it a couple times. When I was in high school, actually, is when I first read it, and I had a friend, a non-Scientology friend, who thought it was one of the best science fiction books he'd ever read. You know, he'd never had anything to do with Scientology, but he loved Battlefield Earth. And I thought it had some original thought and some original concepts in it, and it was kind of clever, and you know, I enjoyed it. Of course, when the movie came out, oh my God, you know, we had to go watch that thing like 4 or 5 times in the theater the opening weekend in order to try to boost sales and make it a hit, you know, that weekend, which we totally failed at. You know, we being the Scientologists, right? I was in the Sea Org at that time, and we had our tickets paid for us, and we had to go see that movie over and over again. Anyway, I started kind of not liking Battlefield Earth so much at that point. The movie was just awful, and it wasn't the book. So, so you can't really judge the book by that movie, because they really are two separate things. But now I look back on it and I see all of the Scientology influence in Battlefield Earth, and I don't really like that very much. And I also see more, not to be, you know, too hypercritical, or not to try to, you know, be duplicitous even with myself. I mean, I did enjoy it for a long time as a book, and now I look back on it and I just kind of go, well, you know, with a more critical eye, I can also see some, you know, some very, very stereotyped characters and ideas in the book itself too. So, especially in the second half of the book. And as far as me being able to read books, it's called staying up really late. When, for example, when the last Harry Potter book came out, I literally didn't sleep I slept like 2 hours for 2 nights in a row, and I just read that book all night long until I finished it. So that's how I read while I was in the Sea Organization. Jennifer Isaacs. What media do you suggest about skeptical thinking that may help others open the mind, but not so much brains fall out? What do you suggest would be better ways to promote media literacy? Well, here's the thing about that, is there is no one source you can go to. There's no one-stop shopping for critical thinking. You can't go to the BBC or Al Jazeera News or the New York Times or the LA Times or any one source and expect that you're going to get all the information that you need on any topic. It just doesn't work that way. Every single writer has a bias of some kind. It is nearly impossible, unless you're an academic scholar who's trained into some kind of, completely neutral viewpoint about things. And even then, I doubt that happens very often. But when it comes to media, there's always some slant. There's always some take on a circumstance that's happened or a historical series of events that have occurred. Somebody's got an opinion about it, and they're going to tell you about those events from that opinion. And so I've not ever found in the time that I've been doing this that I've been able to go to one source that's always more reliable than another source, kind of thing. There are sources to avoid because of the blatancy of the bias. Conspiracy theory websites are almost useless for information because the confirmation bias that exists with those people is so heavy that they blatantly will ignore key facts or key pieces of information that are very important to the narrative of what you're trying to learn about, whether it be 9/11 or the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers or the federal banking system or any of that kind of thing. Those sites leave out vast quantities of information that would balance their kind of crazy viewpoint about these conspiracies. So I've kind of avoid those kind of sites. I try to just look at data, and I'm willing to look at data from any place. I'm trying not to be ad hominem or just attack a source just because it's got belief ABC that doesn't agree with me, so therefore I'm not going to listen to anything they say. I do try to avoid that. I'm talking about more of having looked into certain sites or certain areas. You just kind of go, wow, there's just no real value on truth here, and so you just kind of learn to avoid those ones. People talk about the BBC and European stations as a good countermeasure to looking at United States media. If you're looking for an external view of things happening in the United States, I think there's a point there, because there's less of a vested interest in telling you things from a right-wing perspective or a conservative perspective, which is where a lot of media goes sometimes. On the other hand, though, you have liberal left-leaning media, and they will also, both of these things, the problem with bias is that it leaves out information that's not, that doesn't conform with their narrative of events or what their bias or what they want you to think about certain things that have happened. And so that's why looking at both or getting a balanced approach is something that will give you a more in-depth view. I also pay a lot of attention to history, to historical events leading up to things. If I'm looking at a mass shooting, here, well, I'll look at other mass shootings over here, and here, and it tends to take away some of the if you spend some time and do that, it tends to take away some of the alarmist, reactionary sort of thoughts that you can get because this shooter was white and a teenager, and so you immediately can start jumping to conclusions about mass shootings in general, which aren't necessarily founded or warranted opinions to have when you look at a broader historical view of the situation. So my advice right now is as limited as it is, because I don't consider that I'm super, super well educated on this yet, getting there, is to multiple sources of information, gauge the truth or falsity of the information based on not just multiple sources saying the same thing, but looking at things from different perspectives and from different biases. If I'm pronouncing that right. If you're reading a right-wing biased story about an event, take the time to read a left-wing biased, purposefully go find a left-wing biased report of that event, and you'll get a very different perspective on what was supposed to be the same circumstances or the same things that happened. And I think that may be a way to balance out how to look at things and know your history, and know human nature. and what people do and what they're willing to do and what they can do and that sort of thing. That also has a lot of significance when you're looking at or trying to decide what's the truth of something and how should you think about something. So those are some ideas. Laura Soros. When I've seen videos and pictures of ex-Scientologists back when they were members, you guys look pale and very thin. I've seen the clip Anonymous took of you smiling in your Sea Org uniform. Mike Rinder looks okay in the older videos, but in the clips from the Panorama, John Sweeney's legendary program, he looks so gaunt and horribly stressed out. His eyes even looked like they changed color since he's been out. Although you were slimmer, you guys look fantastic and healthier since you left. Was it due to the quality or quantity of the diet provided, or did the stress destroy your appetite? I know you did hard physical work in the RPF, but does routine Sea Org work involve physical labor that is physically taxing? Okay, big question here actually, because there's a lot of factors that go into stressing Sea Org members out and giving them that gaunt sort of look. And it is true that in the Sea Org, stress is a major factor in people losing weight and not gaining weight and that sort of thing. And I think Mike Rinder's appearance on Panorama is probably the epitome of what I'm talking about with that. I certainly have gained some weight since I left the Sea Org, and that is, the two reasons I would say for that are stress, because my life is a lot less stressful now than it was, and also a change of diet, because I can eat whatever I want now. And when you're in the Sea Organization, you don't get to eat whatever you want. You eat what they feed you, or what you can get out of the canteen. You know, your diet range is limited to a small circle of food items. So I think it's both of these factors that lead to people having these sort of gaunt, sort of not very healthy looking complexions and physique, and I used to note when I was in the Sea Org that people who left the Sea Org always got bigger, and I used to think derogatorily about them, oh, they just get so out of shape, and this kind of thing, because you are giving yourself the idea that you're in such better condition than they are, and you don't realize looking in a mirror that you're stressing out, those dark circles under your eyes and that kind of thing. So it took a while before I was out to really realize how much that had affected me physically. Physical labor is very much a part of any Sea Org member's existence, or most of them. There's cleaning they do all the time, and work they do all the time, and they could do renovations on buildings and swing sledgehammers and stuff like that. Not just on the RPF, but any crew member could end up doing that kind of thing. And also there would be discipline programs that would be run where calisthenics and exercises and things like that would be run on people as a form of discipline, and they'd have to muster up at the end of the night and do 20 burpees and 50 push-ups and jumping jacks and all this kind of crap in close order formation and marching and stuff like this as an ethics program, as a way of getting them disciplined, so that they would be more, snap and pop when they were working during the day. So that kind of thing also happens in the Sea Org. Moranternet. Chris, I'm a never in, but I cannot stop diving into the extensive works of LRH, mostly because I just love crazy. What, in retrospect, are the craziest and or most disturbing things Source has committed to paper or tape? For me, it's a toss-up between almost everything in A History of Man and the Space Gorilla theme park in Routine 3N for crazy, and Affirmations for direct and disturbing evidence of sheer insanity. Thanks for your videos. This is one of my favorite series ever. Yeah, you actually chose some really good ones there, actually, because those are amongst some of the crazier things that Hubbard wrote about. And by crazy, I do mean irrational, things that cannot be proven and in fact are proven not, that there's no way those things could have happened. Yeah, there's a lot of that. Almost everything in History of Man has been scientifically shown to be complete nonsense. Between the Piltdown Man and the clam and the whole evolutionary nonsense that he talks about, and the dates of things that happened and when they happened and stuff like that. It's just, it's kind of really, real stretch to be able to give any credence to any of that material. I just did some pretty in-depth analysis of the OT levels, and OT3, the Xenu story, is pretty wild in terms of you know, when you use the word crazy, that's pretty open-ended, but in terms of easily, like illogical, doesn't make any sense at all, so easy to poke holes in that it's kind of hard to understand how anyone could possibly believe this material. I'd have to say that Xenu story is definitely up there. You know, between the DC-8 planes transporting 13.5 trillion people from, you know, places that are light years away, to Hubbard getting the North Star wrong. You know, he calls it Polaris, and it was 75 million years ago. Well, guess what? 75 million years ago, Polaris was not the North Star. Wasn't even close. So there's all kinds of holes in this, in his lore, you know, of how he tells the story of this whole great catastrophe that happened here 75 million years ago. OT4, which is the OT drug rundown, also has some pretty wild stuff in it, including the idea that body thetans can create drug substances for real, physical drug substances in your body right now. That's pretty wild. You know, I'd like to see some proof of that. So yeah, it's almost it's almost like going into some of the, you know, I've tried to shy away from evaluating too much, you know, or invalidating too much the beliefs of Scientology, but you know, there's a lot of crazy there. So that sound right there, it's time for Flash Answers. Mr. Marathon, 1989. Scientology seems to be a circular belief system. If something good happens, Scientology gets credit. If not, you didn't use it properly. If someone says he had success with Scientology, it must be true. If they criticize it, they must be evil. Then, the church tries to reinforce this circular system by keeping you in the bubble. Disconnection, discouraging people from surfing the net. Do you agree? Yes, 100%. Cheryl Berry. You've got me really curious as to why you consider Ben Carson to be a prime example of not being a critical thinker. I'm not covertly trying to ascertain your political leanings. Any person who is running for the office of President of the United States is not going to get my vote if they're going to assert things like the pyramids in Egypt were used to store grain, that homosexuality is a choice because people who go to prison go in straight and come out homosexual, or that Obamacare is somehow aligned to or akin to a Gestapo Nazi tactic. These are not statements I can get behind or call them the product of critical thinking or a critically thinking mind. And certainly when you say that the Big Bang Theory is a tool of the devil, I'm going to have an issue with that. So that's why I say that Ben Carson is not a critical thinker. Dangerously talented. Stemming from your remark about Church of Scientology assets, do you think that the Church of Scientology actually has the colossal amount of money to sustain such asset purchases, or is it that they are acquiring these assets using financial sleight of hand, similar to America's Enron, Britain's Mirror Group, or Australia's Bond Corp? Well, this is actually an example where you kind of need to go back and look at some of my earlier videos. As I mentioned in last week's Q&A, it's important that people new to my channel go back and look at a lot of some of the early stuff I put out, because I explained fully that the ideal orgs, the ideal organizations, and the property that the church is purchasing right now almost exclusively are being paid for by the parishioners through fundraising. It's taking years and years of fundraising of the Scientology public to pay for the properties that the church is buying and then taking ownership of. So the church isn't paying out much of anything for these properties. And that's how the scam works. Hamish Downey. Chris, I've noticed that a lot of ex-Scientologists leave the church around the 30-year mark. What is it about this year that makes people who are in say enough is enough? Some of us are just that slow. I mean, I don't know. I have not particularly noticed the 30-year mark to be something that is a threshold or milestone for people coming out of the cult. I think some people were in that long. I know other people who are in for a year or 4 years or 5 years. So I've not particularly noticed that. I would need more specifics to see what you're referring to there. Trevor Rutherford. any information about Lawrence R. Spencer's Alien Interview. Lawrence Spencer is probably going to get the award for the first person who's writing L. Ron Hubbard fan fiction. The book Alien Interview is fiction and a hoax, from what I've been able to find on the net about it. Now, admittedly, I haven't gone deep into this, but Lawrence appears to be a Scientologist. I saw something that indicated that he had written a letter to somebody saying that he was a Scientologist for 31 years. And his website, which I did go to, he calls himself LRS, which I had to laugh at. And a lot of the lore and backstory and words that he uses are very definitely Scientology influenced, without question. When you read the man and the way he writes, he is definitely using Scientology terminology. So I think what you're looking at there in Alien Interview is fan fiction. All right, and so we come to the end of another episode of Critical Q&A. I hope these answers were of some value to you and you got something out of watching this. If you have not checked out that interview with Christiana Miner, then please do so. I think you'll actually get a lot out of that. And of course, check out my latest podcast about the holiday season. We tried to do a little bit of a lighter episode this week because, you know, some episodes prior have been kind of heavy, and we wanted to enter the holiday season with a little bit of spring in our step. So I will look forward to getting more questions from you. Feel free to ask me anything you want, and I will talk to you next week.